It's time to talk Gonzaga basketball.
Get ready.
Zag Insiders Jim Meehan and John Blanchette step away from the paper and up to the microphone to give you the biggest storylines. It's the Spokesman-Review Zags Insiders podcast.
Here we go.
Good Monday morning, and welcome back to the Zags Basketball Insiders podcast, our weekly get-together to talk about all things Gonzaga. Split decision last week. First time we could say that all conference season. But let's introduce our three-man weave here. John Blanchette, Spokesman-Review columnist, and Richard Fox, analyst on Gonzaga basketball broadcasts, SWX, KHQ, and Root. I'm Jim Meehan, the beat writer for Gonzaga with the Spokesman-Review. And let's dive right into it. Zags convincing win at San Francisco, a really good team that's probably going to make the NCAA tournament. That was Thursday. Saturday, not so good from the Zags perspective. They were handled by St. Mary's, a rabid crowd down in Moraga, in their first loss since December 4th to Alabama. But we'll start with the news of the day, and that's the rankings. Just came out, the AP poll. And Zags did lose some of their first place votes, but not their first place standing. They're still number one. Arizona is still number two. Gonzaga's margin actually grew over the second place Wildcats, even though a week ago they were unanimous with 61 first place votes. This time they had 46. The other first place votes went to Baylor, which jumped up 7 spots to number 3. I think they had 4 first place votes. And then Duke, which had a big week too. I think they're in the 4th spot, and they had 11 first place votes. So getting closer, even with more cushion at the top. Net ranking, still Gonzaga, Arizona, first, second. And I guess that's what you get when the top shelf of the AP poll, the first 6 teams, lost Saturday. That's unprecedented. 7 of the top 10 lost Saturday. That's unprecedented. So, John, I guess the Zags picked the right week to drop one if they didn't want to hurt their standing in all these rankings.
Hey, misery loves company. That's what they say. And boy, there was a lot of misery for those higher ranked teams on Saturday. I kept getting word of one after another going down, which made for kind of a weird premonition about what was going to happen on Saturday night. But, that's, this time of year. And there were, some of those losses for those top 6 were from top 10, top 25 teams, obviously Gonzaga being one of them, losing to at the time, 23 ranked St. Mary's. So it's kind of, championship week before championship week. There were some quality games, and most of those losses, in fact, I think all 6 of those losses were on the road, weren't they, for the losing team. So, unusual in that they were all bunched together, but not that unusual with the stakes being what they are this time of year, the level of competition those teams were playing. And, everyone has a bad night, and I guess they all decided to have it on the same day. So, it just makes things more interesting, I think, for the tournament. The fact that it had no particular impact on the poll other than Baylor jumping, but you'll notice that even in Joe Lenardi's bracketology figuring, there weren't many changes there. I think the only one to slip a seed line was Auburn. He had them as the last number 1 seed before. He dropped them down to the 2 line, and everybody else is on the same line virtually. Baylor moves up to the number 1 line, but I don't know. I guess when everyone loses, everyone still wins in that case. So again, I think it just sets up for more drama when it comes time for the tournament.
Well, Richard, if you look at it, these second games of these 2-game series is in conference. I think that's where you see some of these upsets. They got a little better read on the opponent. They have a longer time to study what went right and what went wrong and how to attack them. And I think that's kind of what happened at St. Mary's. The Gales were very well prepared and pulled off the upset. But Saturday went beyond belief there with those results, game after game with top teams falling. And a lot of them weren't, tooth and nail. As Wildcats, Arizona Wildcats with Tommy Lloyd got beat by 16 at Colorado. But Richard, as you look back on it, when you go into those second games of a series, your second time around, those games always get tighter. You saw it with Gonzaga and Santa Clara, blew them out in Santa Clara, and then had a pretty good fight on their hands up here. What do you make of that dynamic when you have to play a team two times, and in Gonzaga and St. Mary's case, might be three times? They might meet here in a week or so down in Vegas.
Well, for St. Mary's and USF to some extent, because I thought they played on balance a pretty good game. It's nice when that second game's at home, and just the benefit of that first run up here at GU. You kind of go into those games knowing it's going to be pretty difficult, if not impossible, to find a way to win the game. But it allows for you maybe to try something different in that first go round, and then just knowing you've got that second opportunity down the road at your place. So there's some familiarity that you get throughout the season or throughout the conference schedule. The second time you play somebody, Gonzaga's got a lot of big names and a big reputation. I think for younger players that they're more comfortable the second time through, because maybe some of that awe and shock is gone after you played Drew Timme the first time. You're a little bit more comfortable. And I think you saw that with Saxon for St. Mary's. I mean, he was a completely different player at home the second time around against Gonzaga. So, yeah, I mean, that familiarity can be problematic. And, Randy Bennett's as comfortable playing Gonzaga as anybody in the country. Forget about the league. I mean, he just knows his identity as a coach, and that program has an identity in a way. They haven't had any of that turnover. He's been there. They've got the way that they want to play year in and year out. I mean, some of the faces are going to change over the years, but the player type typically doesn't change, and how they want to try to slow Gonzaga doesn't change. And he just happened to have this year a group of guys that were good enough to put 40 minutes together. So what's really interesting is that third game, if they do get to play each other that third time, it's going to be a fascinating game to watch, because both teams are effectively not going to have much to play for when it comes to getting into the tournament, and their seeds are largely going to be locked up. You're certainly trying to win the WCC tournament championship, but I think the benefit that St. Mary's had, and the schedule was favorable this year, was that they got that second crack at GU at home. And you could see, I mean, you tell us, Jim, you were there. I mean, that on TV, the atmosphere looked unbelievable. I mean, what was it like being in the building?
It is chaos in the building.
Right.
It is bananas in there. And it was at San Francisco. I mean, they had people literally sitting in the aisles all the way up to the media row, and then sitting in the front row in the end zones, students, like you sit in kindergarten, legs crossed and sitting there trying to stay out of the way. A lot of fire codes were broken that night. Not quite as many at St. Mary's, but the standing room only. They were packed behind us. We're at the very top of the building, and they're, 2 or 3 deep back there. So, but they were into the game from start to finish, and they always are. Just in the past, the Zags have had pretty good starts down there. I think they've won the last 5 times down there, all by double figures, and kind of took some of the noise out of the crowd. Did that at San Francisco. They took the noise out of the crowd at the end of the half with a nice run, and then kept it going in the second half. And that turned the volume down a little bit, but those places were ready to go. And I think you're right. That second game, obviously, how it played out on the schedule was big from St. Mary's end, and also that the Zags had to deal with San Francisco on Thursday, who was another top 25, 30 Met team, and you have to have your full attention on that, or you're not getting to St. Mary's with that unbeaten conference record. So, well, John, let's talk a little bit about San Francisco. The interesting thing to me was the Dons were very physical. Had a weathered Gonzaga's start. I think the Zags scored on the first 7 or 8 possessions. and they kept it close, and really they were physical inside. They were physical how they guarded pretty much everywhere. There were some bumps and blood spilled in that game. But the Zags met that challenge on Thursday night. Wasn't quite the same Saturday, but Thursday, Zags stepped up and delivered on the road.
Yeah, as I suppose disappointing or despairing for some fans as the Saturday result was, I think they should take heart in how Gonzaga approached and dealt with things on Thursday night. I thought they did a terrific job on the Don's guards. Jamari Bouye had a tough night. Shabazz was a little more active and a little more of a thorn in the side, but even his shooting numbers, I think, were 6 for 18. And that's maybe misleading. He's never been a great percentage guy. He gets his stuff done in volume and creates things, but Bouye had a tougher go of it. And while that left some points for guys like Julian Richtrein off the bench, I thought the Zags' defensive effort, with maybe the exception of a stretch there in the first half, was really terrific and allowed them to get that early cushion, a 10-point lead at halftime. And then, as coaches like to point out, the importance of that first 5 minutes of the second half stretch to 20 like that within the first 3, 4, 5 minutes. And then they had to do a little holding on, but they, the game was never in doubt. Despite, as you say, San Francisco's physical approach, I thought Gonzaga's poise was pretty stellar, and obviously got great production inside. Double from Chet Holmgren, 15 boards on top of his 21 points, blocked half dozen shots, and then Drew Timme was solid as usual with 20. And so all in all, I think a fine all-around effort, and really didn't presage what was going to come down on Saturday.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk about Timme and Holmgren and what went down Saturday, but on Thursday, they were outstanding in every way. I mean, Timme was flirting with a triple-double. I still remember looking at the stat sheet late in the first half, and he had 6 assists, and I was like, man, I missed a few of those. He was really distributing the ball, and Holmgren doing what he does defensively, shutting down the lane, made it pretty hard for Masalski, made it hard for the guards to finish. That's the other thing that gets lost. It's not that he's just blocking every shot. It's just when guys come in there and they're 6'2" or 3 and the long arm of the law is out there, you have a tough time finishing. And but those two were outstanding in that game. And I thought a segment that really helped turn it was when Hunter Salas guarded Bouye later in the first half, and Bouye had a big start. He was hitting everything, and crowd was involved. Shabazz, same way. He had it going, and I thought the defense on him, and then Hickman in the second half on Bouye, I thought that helped turn that tide, and the Zags got that lead extended and kind of got the noise out of the building. Richard, what did you see when Gonzaga started to take control of that game later in the first half?
Well, I mean, you referenced Salas, and he had 7 points and knocked down a pretty timely 3 from the wing. He's not. We know what he can do defensively, but I thought the little offensive lift off the bench was pretty timely and impactful. No, I mean, it's a tale of 2 games this weekend, and I think you saw the best of Gonzaga on Thursday. How dominant they are inside. I mean, those guys over 40 points combined, almost 25 rebounds. You referenced the blocks for Holmgren, the assists for Timme. And just Gonzaga controlled the game throughout, despite the fact that San Francisco scored it well enough for stretches to stay with you, despite what Gonzaga was doing offensively. To John's point earlier, when they really needed to get a stop or create, some challenges for San Francisco, they had stretches where they did that, and that's how they just kind of methodically built that lead out and just got it to the point where it just never really felt like it was going to be close. So you saw the best, I think, of GU Thursday night, and what when they're playing well, what makes them so difficult to beat. They shot the ball well from three, 10 of 20 from the 3-point line, assisted on over half their shots, just really good balance offensively. What else can you say? Took care of the ball for the most part, only 12 turnovers. So, I thought it was a really impressive start to the weekend. I mean, that's stating the obvious. Because I think that San Francisco team is really good. I think they are a tournament team. And we'll get into the conference tournament, and they've got a real good opportunity to San Francisco to hopefully get a couple good wins before we get to Selection Sunday.
Well, let's flip the page to Saturday. And you kind of could tell right from the get-go that this was going to be a tough night for the Zags. They fell behind 8-0 right out of the gate. Tommy Kuhse, 2 drives in there and scores. Just kind of a tough guy to deal with off that ball screen. And he doesn't look like he's moving at full speed, and he's not the most athletic guy, but he gets the ball in there and finds a way to score it or finds an open teammate. And Gonzaga just looked out of sorts to me from the start. Probably the main storyline of that game was what the Gales did with Drew Timme inside and Chet Holmgren as kind of the stretch 4 on the offensive side. 12 points. Each of them had 6 points. I think I looked it up. I wrote about it a little this morning that's the lowest they've had all year, other than that tied Texas Tech, which we kind of all know what Texas Tech does to the paint. It is locked down. There's a moat around it. You cannot score. They do that to everybody. But they gave up 13 threes to Gonzaga that day. There's always something you're giving up when you're taking things away. But that's what made St. Mary's' approach and results impressive to me. They took away Drew. He looked like he was in a phone booth sometimes. There's people all over him, and every time he touched it or moved one direction or another, there was somebody there. But they did that while not getting burned by kickouts, by not getting burned by the 3, or Holmgren getting the lob and the dunk, or making something on his own offensively. Foxy, you're a big man who appreciates good big man play, and the Zags have had it all year. And that's the thing. If one of them's not on, usually the other one is.
Right.
Timme 37 versus Texas, Holmgren 2. Or Loyola, where Holmgren had, I think, 21 and Timme had 8. But to take away both, that you have to give the Gales credit for how they pulled it off.
Yeah, you didn't get anything from Watson either off the bench. That's something we've kind of come to expect. Over the weekend, Anton didn't get a bucket. I thought St. Mary's did as good a job as anybody this year of finding a way to help off the perimeter shooters, to cause that congestion, that phone booth effect, but still find a way to get out and contest shots or force Gonzaga's guards to drive off the 3-point line. And a lot of what they did was pretty subtle. I watched the game live, and then last night I watched it again. And we see Timme and Holmgren play all the time, and we know how much they like to spin off of contact. And really, the help kept coming off of that spin. They wouldn't see it coming. They didn't double or show that help on the strong side. They waited for those guys to try to, play off of the initial contact. And we saw, a couple different strips of Timme, or just leading to a contested shot. Holmgren, off of those high post catches, trying to spin off that contact, and there's a hand. It may not lead to a turnover, but all of a sudden you're bogged down. Yeah. You've got to kick it out. You've got to start over. And it's about as physical as anybody's been allowed to play against Gonzaga, in my opinion, inside. There was just a ton of contact, a lot of stuff that, quite frankly, has been called this year in league play, just wasn't. And I think that's what the tournament's going to be like. You get to the Sweet 16, the whistles are going to get they're going to put the whistle in the pocket. It's got to be egregious and obvious. The ticky tack, the slight bump on a hook shot. You're not going to get those calls in March. So I thought it was a great kind of, not a test so much as just a reminder for those guys. You've got to play a little bit stronger, and you've got to expect that contact. You're not going to get the whistle. So I just thought their game plan defensively was really good. There was a ton of bodies in the paint. Their guards did a great job of finding the right opportunities just to dig down. They rarely completely doubled. And their big guys did a good job of just staying strong and making those guys shoot over a body. I was just really impressed with it. And the last thing I would say is, and I think particularly Timmy, and it's hard to criticize a guy who's that good, but sometimes he holds in on the catch. He just takes a long time to get into what he wants to do. And I think that's a function of expecting that double. He's such a good passer. We saw it Thursday night against San Francisco. I think often he's at his best when he goes on the catch. He gets into his move. In the pass, the reading of the help, that's a secondary thing. But he immediately is looking to put pressure on the defense. I thought against St. Mary's, on so many of his catches on the low block or, kind of the extended post, he'd hold it and let St. Mary's really get set. And that just didn't work. I think you have to be a little bit quicker against what they're trying to do.
Yeah, I think, a lot of teams, especially dealing with Timmy or whoever in the past with the Zags, how they time that help, I guess, whether it's the first bounce or
right.
And that's usually the case if there's a first bounce. St. Mary's had the timing right. They had it where they made it uncomfortable immediately, stopped the move, and then he had to pass it back out because Toss is still in front of him. And then they just rotated and recovered so well that it just never seemed like the Zags got a ton of quality looks, which we just kind of grown used to seeing. And they make you shoot over them almost every time down the floor. And that in itself makes it hard to score, doesn't it? I mean, that.
Well, and you're absolutely right. Your job as Toss or Saxon was, you're not trying to block their shot. You're not trying to strip the ball. Just make them shoot over the body. Everybody else is going to come in and swipe at it and try to mess with them. Just make sure they shoot over body. There was a play in the first half where Mullins comes over from the far side. Holmgren has the ball. He looks to spin off of, I think, Bowen. And he just dove in, forces Holmgren to pick it up, and he has to do something with the ball. And then he's right back out to a shooter. His intention wasn't to try to get a steal. It was just to force Holmgren to pick it up, and then I'm going to go back to mine. Yeah. And you just saw that over and over again. I thought it was a really well-executed game, but it's a whole lot easier to talk about doing that than it is to actually do it. Yeah. And they did a great job of actually executing.
Yeah, have you ever mentioned that concept or talk about it with Mark Few? That's what he talks about. It's not the double teaming. It's what you do after that. It's the rotation and recovery, or the help and recover that makes it work. John, there were so many issues in that game for Gonzaga, offensively, and I thought defensively as well. We talked about the Zags not being able to hit the three ball even on kickouts or what have you. The Gales hit two at the end. And Mark Few talked about that was a product of they had to take some chances and they had to force the issue with some pressure. The guy they left open, Kyle Bowen, was, I believe, 0 for 5 from three. He had one that looked like one of my putts when I've got the yips. It kind of went sideways to the left of the hoop. And then when the game was on, the Zags were coming back, boom, boom. He hits 2 daggers on threes to seal it up. Of the myriad of things, Timmy Holmgren, ball security, I mean, it turned it over. And St. Mary's took advantage of with some rare fast break points. How they defended the ball screen coverage, Kusi getting it in there and making things happen. What stood out to you is some of the things that went wrong, or the biggest things that went wrong?
Well, I got to tell you, I didn't see the game live. I was doing track all weekend, so I started my Monday with the viewing of the tape. And, well, I thought I was, after all I'd heard about how terrible Gonzaga had played, and they did not play well in particular. But I was so impressed with St. Mary's, and it was actually kind of a joy to watch what they were able to do. I love it when teams, throw a monkey wrench into things, and that's certainly what they did. Richard talked about it so much, but you mentioned not being able to score, kicking the ball back out when Timmy and Holmgren were blanketed. Some of that started with the post defense. I think St. Mary's, in playing them so physical, some of the things that the referees did let go, were able to keep Drew another step, maybe 2 steps outside, not as deep as he usually catches it. I noticed that, Drew drew his usual 5 or 6 fouls, but only took 2 free throws. That means that the fouls were coming. They were meeting him. They were bumping him off the block. That leaves less room for the guys who are diving down, who are pinching in, trying to double team. They have less room or less space to have to cover in recovery, able to get out. You notice you never, and obviously St. Mary's terrific in limiting Gonzaga's transition game. But you never saw Chet Holmgren being able to take that trailer 3 that he's been just deadly with this year. And he got 1 3 off. It was pretty contested, not particularly in rhythm. He never got a chance to get comfortable shooting from the outside. So the overall game plan and just the amazing job. Gosh, I remember one time a pass going into Drew flat in the middle of the key, and I saw 5 guys. Yeah. 5 guys pinching in on that, and the ball gets deflected and off they go. Just a terrific game plan by Randy. And let's face it, as Richard pointed out earlier in the podcast, there isn't anybody Gonzaga is going to face in the NCAA tournament that's going to be as prepared as St. Mary's is when Randy gets his 2nd or 3rd crack at these guys. Yeah. I mean, he's got 20 years now of game planning Gonzaga. And while it isn't always pretty sometimes, he's suffered his share of blowouts. The 2nd or 3rd time around, it's going to be a pain. And that's what happened. I will say, I think there are a couple of factors that, and Richard mentioned not getting anything from Anton Watson. That's happened 3 or 4 games in a row now. I think Anton's play, whether it's fewer minutes, a more difficult matchup or whatever it is, I don't think he's been quite as helpful as he has been and significant to Gonzaga's success as he has been or was earlier in January, earlier in February even. And I guess that goes for the whole bench to a certain extent. Obviously, Mark is going to whittle down his rotation. The 2 freshman guards aren't going to get as much time because Nemhard's going to play 40 minutes. Rashard's going to play 37 minutes. But when they're in there, they've got to have some impact. They've got to do some things right. For as good as he was on Thursday night, Hunter can't get beat down the floor by Jabe Mullins when he's in there for defensive purposes. Nolan Hickman's got to have some sort of impact to take some of the heat off Andrew Nemhard. They're going to have to get a little more off the bench. They needed a Mitchell Saxon type effort from somebody on Saturday night, and they just didn't get it.
Yeah, it was just kind of stunning how it all went down. But I got a slew of emails and texts complaining about the officials. Well, maybe it wasn't the finest 2 hours of refereeing, but no, there's no way I'm putting that loss on.
Oh no, no, there's no.
The issue to me, or the credit to me, goes to Randy Bennett.
Yep.
I think he's 12 and 45 or 6, something like that against Gonzaga. But he knows the formula, and he knows what his team has to do to pull it off. It's whether they can actually do it. And they were close or in the neighborhood up in Spokane. They made some changes. They played about as well as they could play for a lot of that game. Now, in the second half, they did open the door a few times, and the Zags kind of refused to walk through to make it real interesting. But there's no 2 teams, I think, maybe in the country, other than maybe when Duke had Coach K and North Carolina had Roy Williams, that know each other better inside and out than those 2 teams. And Randy, he might not even have to watch film. He just knows both ways. They probably just go, oh, they're going to do this, and here's the counter. And here's what we're going to do. But you have to just give him credit. He does this. Seems like every 2 or 3 years he finds the formula and pulls it off, and he gets them. He usually gets Gonzaga to play their style just because they limit the turnovers and the transition points and really make Gonzaga work. And again, credit to Randy Bennett. He knows how to do it. It's just sometimes the Zags are so good that It doesn't show up on the scoreboard, but the man's done a heck of a job down in St. Mary's.
Well, I will say this. I think Gonzaga was looking to play a basketball game on Saturday night. St. Mary's was looking to get in a fight. It was like, we're going to beat you up. We're going to beat you up. I mean, every cut, there's a hand on your hip or a bump. Every time you cross the lane, every time Nembhard has the ball at the top of the key, there's Kuzi or somebody else just tapping him, touching him the whole time. And that can wear on you. If you don't go into those types of games with that expectation, it kind of gets you on your heels. And it just felt like that from the jump. And that's in part for what St. Mary's may or may not have felt confident that they're going to be in the NCAA tournament, but they knew if we win tonight, there's no more questions. We're in. We can take, breathe a sigh of relief. So that's a crude way of describing it, but it felt that way. Gonzaga was ready to play some basketball, and St. Mary's was like, let's get in a fight. Let's just muck this up, make it physical. And, the one thing about Bennett, every time he's had a guard like Kuzi, so I think about McConnell, Mills, Delva. Those three guys are quite a bit better than Kuzi, but they play the same way because they run so many ball screens. And I thought what Kuzi did well, more than anything else he did, was he'd come off those screens as slow as molasses, but he'd get Nembhard or Bolton on his back, and he would just kind of slowly putz down into the lane and all of a sudden create a problem. And he could kick it out to a guy, which might lead then to a couple quick passes on the perimeter, and he'd get a hockey assist. Or he'd find a way early to finish at the rim. When he's got a guard like that knows how to play in the pick and roll, they're really difficult to play. And then you couple that with what, you talked about it, Jim, at the end of the game, just they had to take some chances, Gonzaga did, to try to speed them up and maybe create a turnover. But I thought their rotations defensively were off all night. And, that's a big reason for that is that pick and roll. And Kuzi's ability, even if he didn't directly score or lead to an assist, he just forced Gonzaga's defense to bend in such a way where they just weren't able to recover consistently enough.
Yeah. Well, Emmett Narr, another point guard that was stellar for St. Mary's over the years, very similar to Kuzi, I think. In flipping that, Zags had 4 assists. I mean, that is almost unbelievable to see that. Now, Andrew Nembhard played 40 minutes. And did not have an assist for the first time in his career.
Yeah, some of that's the finishers not finishing. who make those into assists. But you're right. I mean, your point guard's got to have more than 0.
Yeah, and I mean, how good he is off the ball screen. They ran it, but it didn't quite gel that night. But all right, that's enough St. Mary's talk. I'm sure people out there don't want to hear any more of that. So we'll take a quick look at this week. You've got this long stretch annually between the final regular season game to where they enter the tournament in the semifinals in Vegas, something like 8-9 days in between games. And they're going to play in the semis. They don't know who. They'll find out Saturday. Same thing with St. Mary's. And this is kind of always the week you think, do you self-scout? Do you go through and work on yourselves? Do you fine-tune? Work on a few maybe new wrinkles, or the thing that St. Mary's did is they probably have every team in the WCC that might play Gonzaga in the tournament scouring that tape. Every team in the top 30 that thinks they're going to make a run to the Final Four that might play the Zags, they're all scouring that tape, looking for what worked and how to pull this off. But the Zags have a decision of their own and how they approach this week. And I think they've always used it to just kind of refresh their legs and their bodies and mentally and physically, get back to 100%. I think they might have to adjust that in some way to beat on each other after that physical challenge that they didn't meet Saturday. They got out-toughed and outworked in a lot of ways. I don't know, maybe a padded practice in football analogy, but I don't think they like to do that. And maybe they won't, but I think there might be some adaptation to their practice schedule this week, John.
Yeah, I think Richard could probably speak to this better, having played for Mark and knowing what Mark's preferences are in that situation. But you're right. They've got to find some resolve, and maybe they'll find it on their own. I don't think, I really don't think the players really need to see this film that much. They know what happened. They know that they got beat up, and they know that they got out tough. And they'll, it's up to them to dig and find that resolve to play that much tougher. But you're right. Every other opponent now, and it has been the case. We mentioned San Francisco playing much more physical. Santa Clara the week before really got after Gonzaga in a physical fashion. That's how you're going to try and take them out of their game. Let's face it. And that's what Gonzaga is going to see from now on. So there is going to have to be some mind adjustment to that circumstance. And I think the players can make it as much as, Gonzaga isn't. Some of those guys aren't necessarily, they're more on the finesse side than the physical side, but they're going to have to be prepared for it. Now, if maybe a couple of hard practices this week will be a good reminder. But again, they've been through a long season already. Yeah. There's a long season ahead. I mean, they're planning on going deep into the tournament. So you're going to have some physical games ahead. I don't know that you want to take it out of them too much, but there's probably going to be some certainly pointed instruction in that regard.
Yeah, and not to overreact. I mean,
right. No,
just
panic.
One game, 40 minutes, and a team that played extremely well. Zags have met the physical challenge most of the year and most of the time, but as Richard mentioned, how physical it is in the tournament. Well, it's going to get physical again in there. I mean, just remember Baylor, how aggressive they were against the Zags in the title game. Everybody's going to try this formula, so it's something they're going to have to deal with. Richard, let's flip it forward to the WCC tournament. The pairings are out. The matchups are set for the opening rounds. The Zags come in, as I said, in the semifinals, and they won't know who they'll play. But you've got a few teams that could make some noise here. That Portland kind of showed some things here at the end of the season, really had a great run. I think they're a 6th seed, if I'm reading my bracket correctly. I think so. BYU 5 seed started to play better at the end of the regular season after a really rough patch. I think Santa Clara is the best team Herb Semdex had down there. I think they could make some noise, and I think San Francisco is capable. This tournament might not look like past tournaments where it's just pencil Gonzaga and St. Mary's into the final. I still think they're both getting there, but I think those games Monday night and especially the Saturday night games are going to be pretty tight.
Well, I don't know who's going to be coach of the year. It's probably Mark or Bennett, but I think Shante Leggins should probably win that, given how terrible Portland's been the last 3 years. For them to win 7 games in the league and get themselves a bye is pretty remarkable, in my opinion. But I don't have a vote. If San Francisco and Santa Clara can get to the semifinal, that may be the best collection of 4 teams to play in the semifinal that I can remember. The quality, all 4 of those teams, I don't think we're getting 4, but, having seen all 4 play, having called the Santa Clara game, Santa Clara's got NCAA tournament talent, and they play that way. And I think sometimes we take it for granted because of how dominant Gonzaga is, and Gonzaga really is kind of in a different stratosphere than everybody else. So when we compare Santa Clara to Gonzaga, of course we're going to say, well, they're not as good as everyone thinks they are, or the league isn't quite where the national media might be saying it is. But if you look at it from that perspective, and you kind of put Gonzaga on the side, and you look at the balance of college basketball, I mean, these top 4 teams, or rather these other 3 teams, are very, very good. So, I think San Francisco's got a great opportunity if the bracket breaks right for them. I'm not penciling BYU winning their first game, given how inconsistent they've been. But if they get a chance to play BYU, who's a good team, win that game, then they get another whack at Gonzaga. Yeah. And much like what we saw Saturday night, that's going to be a pretty desperate team, understanding if we win tonight, if we win this game, we're locked in. Even if we lose to whoever's on the other side of the championship game, or whoever plays us in the championship game. If we beat GU, we're in. And for St. Mary's, I mean, they certainly don't have quite the level of desperation, but Santa Clara does. And if I remember correctly, Santa Clara beat St. Mary's earlier this year. Mm-hmm. So that's a game that they think they're going to have a chance to win. So there's a lot of good stories in conference. I certainly don't think this is a cakewalk for GU. They're going to get another weekend, another set of really good games, which is, I said it going into this last week, this is what you want. This is the tune-up that you want. You want that St. Mary's game. You prefer to win it, but you want that St. Mary's game. You want to have that kind of physical basketball you've got to play through. It's going to be great for GU to have a couple great quality games in Vegas, and it's going to be maybe as good a tune-up as they've been able to get out of the WCC tournament in a long time. I mean, it's more often than not, they kind of roll through it.
Well, they're going to probably face 2 quad 1 teams down there. They just got done facing 2 quad 1s and Santa Clara the game before. So if you could draw out the toughest, best preparation, that's it. And the irony of you saying that it might be the best 4, in the semis round and on with Santa Clara, USF, Gonzaga, and St. Mary's is the 5th team. BYU is barely out of the tournament. They're first 4 out in one of the brackets I saw today, and kind of had they were ranked earlier in the year. They beat Oregon. They had some really nice wins before things came apart, but they're playing better now. Maybe we might see a different team down in Vegas. And you want to talk about driven? That team could make or break it with a couple of wins in Vegas and get right back into the tournament themselves. John, it's going to be interesting. The Zags always have that one singular advantage that nobody else has in Vegas. I got about 5,000 fans in the stands that outnumber everybody by a ton down there. But I'm looking forward to this tournament. I think it's going to be a pretty good showcase of what the WCC has this year, and might open an eye or two nationally that it's not pushovers when you get to those top 4 or 5.
Well, there's been a lot of talk lately about, this again, lately it's been happening for a decade and more now, but this time of year, the chatter has increased out there about, Gonzaga's schedule and Gonzaga's league, and how these, how the Power 5 teams have to cannibalize each other every weekend, and Gonzaga can just sail through. It's not a proper narrative most years, and certainly not this year. And you pointed out BYU is the 5th team. That's a capable team. It's not the best BYU team we've seen. They've had injuries. They've had other issues. They're not consistent, but they're capable, and they're on the bubble. And they're barely in the upper division of the WCC. I think that says it all about what the league has done this year. The strides that teams like San Francisco have made, Santa Clara, which really wasn't expected to do a lot. They were another mid-level team, but they've played much more soundly than they have in the past. This is a good league. It's every bit as strong as it's ever been, and it's not the cakewalk league that all the fans of the Power 5 leagues want to say it is. It's simply not. Would Gonzaga's record be the same in a Power 5 league? Probably not. Probably those the lower end teams in the WCC you can get a real break from, but still these tests against San Francisco, St. Mary's, Santa Clara, and even BYU, those are real tests for this team, and there will be some tests in Vegas for sure.
And I think as we mentioned, it's as good a preparation as they could hope for, especially this year. Well, that's going to do it for this edition of the Zags Basketball Insiders podcast. We rambled on a little bit today, but we'll be back next Monday. No games to talk about, but you know us, we'll find something to fill the void. Our thanks to our man, Jesse Tinsley, for the production of this and handling all the technical issues that we don't have a clue how to do. That's going to do it. We'll tweet out the links to this. You can find it on the Spokesman-Review website, Apple Podcasts. We're out there on all the main avenues that you get your podcasts. So tune in. Thanks again. We'll see you next Monday.